Mitch, thanks for taking the time to jump on today and talk about Genie.
No worries.
Um,
Thanks, Em.
Welcome, Mitch, who's a solutions architect from Ignite. So just to paint the picture, what we're going to talk about today is Genie and how it works. And the reason why we're here is I am a person who looks after marketing and branding at an energy company, and which has Databricks and has worked with Ignite. And recently I had to do a report for our board, and I wanted to get what I thought was a really simple report done. And I was passed over to our analysts, and kind of had to have my needs sort of put in a list of needs, and I had to kind of essentially get a ticket with one of our data analysts to get some data that I felt I should be really easily and able to access whenever I needed it. And I also didn't want to waste the time of our really good quality data analysts who had a lot of important work to do with my essential graph that I needed to pop in a PowerPoint deck. So I went moaning to Mitch, and Mitch said, "You need to know about Genie." And then he just threw me. So, Mitch, let's do a little quick bit, kind of redo what we went through. What's
Absolutely.
Genie and how does it work?
Yeah, sure. So Genie is a natural language querying engine that comes out of the box with tools like Databricks, right? So any modern data platform with the advent of large language models and AI is moving in this direction where they're incorporating some of those natively to their platforms. And the idea is that that's supposed to support, business users like yourself to be able to take the queries that you have as, I want to see this piece of information. Can you show it to me? And get them interacting with the data, very quickly.
So I'm no longer a second-class citizen because I can't code. I can get access to existing data when I need it, how I need it. Yeah.
I mean, exactly, right? I personally wouldn't classify you as second-class citizen. I think that the business users are the people who understand how something actually works. And there's a lot of translation that needs to happen between the data teams and the business teams. So the idea with something like this is that you get more comfortable dealing with the data directly. It reduces and in some cases eliminates your need to have coding skills. And it helps you get reports and results quickly. But on a longer term, it allows you to start using the same language as the data analysts. So when you're talking to them, you are now talking the same kind of thing.
And can refine things, right? Can go, oh, the way you're
Exactly.
showing me the data this way, I really need to see it this way, which you may not have known.
Exactly. It builds that data culture in a company. And I think that this is what people mean when they talk about democratizing data access and information, right? It's allowing all your users to start talking the same language because, we know data in back-end systems, very complicated. There's a lot of translation that needs to go into understanding it.
Yeah.
The business users have some very fundamental questions that come up all the time. So how do you make those two people talk to each other?
Shall we jump into it and show
absolutely.
Show people what you showed me?
Yeah, no worries.
We were just talking for those of you who've joined, Mitch and I were just talking before we started. And of course, he and I had a run through of this and practiced how we were going to go. And Mitch just told me something pretty cool. Do you want to share what you told me?
Absolutely. So we've run through some of this, like, how does Genie work? What do you need to get started? This is what it looks like, by the way. It's just a screen inside of a modern data platform like Databricks. And we've run some questions. And when we set the space up initially, there were a couple of questions which worked really well. And then there was a question where I was asking Genie to start stitching together two pieces of information from different tables. Without my input, that didn't give me the right answer. And then without needing to correct it, just by upvoting particular things and downvoting particular things, running extra queries in the background to figure out how I would do it, the Genie space has figured out how to do it automatically without me needing to go in and start curating things. So if I was a business user, this would be great, right? In the energy sector, dispatch, something that people want to start looking at. I've just asked Genie to run show me the dispatch price for each region over time. And it's gone away, run a query, and spat out a graph for me straight
Yep.
away, right? Then you can start changing things around with this visualization. Say you only care about, the last couple of weeks. You can start zooming in. You can pull this out for your reports. You can pull this out, stick it in a PowerPoint, and use that as your input, right? So all I need to do is just hit download, and away we go.
And it gives me a PNG. And one of the things that's really important for me, and is often important for lots of people in a business role, is I want to be able to graph in the colors, my corporate colors or the colors that I like. Can I edit that?
Yeah,
look,
absolutely.
I can do different graphs as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So if this was giving me a line graph and I didn't want that, I wanted an area or a bar, I'd be able to just switch it over real easy. I can just try and do that right now. And then you can start editing your colors for whatever your corporate style guide gives you. Turn that into something that's investor friendly.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And I can change the axes. That feels a bit like Excel for me. And then I get a PNG which I can drop into my PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you were saying to me before, and I think this is where we're heading, we run a report, Genie can learn, but there's a real piece that I need to learn as a business user first around what to ask Genie for, right? So presumably you and the analytical team have to put some work in to define each of these kind of terms. Like I can see, settlement date, dispatched price, or dispatched energy. How do you go about that?
Yeah, so I mean, you're absolutely right. There's a bit of work that needs to be done to almost set the stage in order for this to really be useful. And I mean, we've had a question come through from the Q&A about some of this inherent ambiguity. It's a valid point. So there are a couple of prerequisites that need to happen here. You need to get your data into the platform first off, right? That's always going to be the case. Then there's a step here where you need to describe the data in a way that matches up with how business users use it, right?
Yep.
And that is where your analysts, your data engineers, your data architects work with the business users to explain and put those comments in on individual columns, tables, that sort of thing. Once you've got that, then you just set up a space in something like Databricks, which just ring fences the data. It means that you don't get too much additional context. You don't have too many tables to get overwhelmed with. And that gives you some boundaries, which allows the AI system to start learning, right? When you have a good result, right? So say I really like this first one, I can, as a business user, just go in and hit good response, right? And that's starting to train the system to recognize what patterns am I wanting in the questions that I'm asking.
And does it train it just for me, or does it train it for all users?
Yeah, it trains it for everyone, right? Okay. So this example that I showed you at the bottom here, or that I spoke about, where we tried this initially a couple of days ago and it gave me a wrong answer and I hit downvote. I went away as an analyst and did a little bit of tinkering without me needing to, do anything extra. The space learned from that tinkering that the analyst was doing and fed it back into the business users. So there's an element there of these systems start feeding back into each other, and without needing to take, a lot of time away or throw it into a ticketing system, you can have the way that the business uses your data start to inform how these spaces kind of work.
So it feeds back and forth. Mitch, I've already got a couple of Q&As, so all our practice is, get ready, here we go.
Yeah, not a problem.
So the first one, and I think you've answered some of it. The first says that given that natural language can be inherently ambiguous, how does AI BI Genie handle such scenarios to provide precise and reliable answers? I think you just talked a bit about that. The second part of this question is more specific. How do you evaluate them, given it has been an ongoing challenge with LLMs? So you'll have to tell me what that is.
Large language models.
Sorry?
Large language models. Essentially, it's like quite high scale. Like the more language, the more words you throw into it, the broader the scope is. So I would describe something differently to how you might describe it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then it says more specifically generation models. So I wonder if
Yep.
you can give us your view on that.
So evaluating, there's a question here around whether or not you do the evaluation as a business user of how successful the result is, or whether you're talking about how Genie does the evaluation of what you're asking. Now, the business user provides feedback of whether Genie has correctly interpreted things or incorrectly interpreted things. And then the analysts work to leverage that into an actual insight. And then that feeds back to the business user. Evaluating the queries themselves, this all runs through Microsoft's OpenAI API. And they have opted into a security model where they don't store any of the queries or any of the data. So it's leveraging the broader trained Open API and leveraging it on top of the narrower scope of your data specifically. So there's an element here of, by keeping the scope quite narrow and not allowing it to run rampant, you're less likely to run into scenarios where it hallucinates things because it's working on what you've already got in your system.
Mm-hmm.
But you've also got the ability to start to refine it by providing it with more specific feedback. So say this wasn't good, I could hit downvote, and I could ask an analyst or an administrator, someone who understands the data a bit more, hey, can you take a look at this?
Yeah, okay. Hey, Mitch, I asked it to do this. It's not the numbers I need, or the numbers feel wrong, or it's different to what I've seen. And then where does that go into your workflow somehow?
Yeah. So that goes right back into my workflow as an analyst or as an administrator. I can go and see all the questions that were asked on this, and I can see, hey, someone requested review on this. Why isn't this working? And I can just click into the question and see, hold on. What was the question? What was the query execution problem? What was the comment? How do I go and solve it? So yeah, that feedback process is all kind of embedded in the tool itself.
That's awesome. So I can still kind of interact with you, and I still kind of get my queries logged while I'm essentially being able to self-serve, which makes me feel
exactly.
I can do a bit of interrogation, think about what I'm trying to analyze. I've got a couple of other questions for you while you're continuing to show us things, because it's, did you want to keep going explaining that, or?
No. So, I mean, this is just the, like, if someone was asked to take a look at it, they would be able to see the underlying code that was generated and be able to start, editing it, providing feedback, rerunning the query. Like, you've got all the tools there. They're just sort of keeping it asynchronous so that the business user and the data analyst don't need to be on a call together to get it working.
That's awesome. So one of the questions I've got is, how does Genie compare to traditional BI tools like Power BI or Tableau when it comes to ad hoc reporting?
So for ad hoc reporting, I suppose this will be able to generate, visualize data really easily, provided that if you're not wanting it to be repeatable, because you're asking Genie questions, it's spitting back a result. If you want it to be repeatable and available for you to just screenshot and pull into a report, you're probably better off standardizing some of these reports and turning them into either dashboards in Databricks or dashboards in Power BI. This is really valuable for that sort of ad hoc kind of query, or the thing where you want a number, but you're not sure whether there's a report that's already existing. You want to start, getting something out of your data without needing to go and throw it into a queue for an analyst.
Which was exactly my particular experience. I just needed a graph for a PowerPoint deck. I knew the data existed. It was, I didn't need to go into, quite frankly, the scary world of Power BI. Which again, kind of, I feel like this is made just for me.
Yep.
And then another question, given the importance of user adoption, what level of training is required for the business users to start using Genie effectively? I can answer that one. None.
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, none, right? Exactly right.
Yeah.
So when you set up the space, you can, the analysts can define, what are some common queries that
Yeah.
business users might be wanting to use. So you can see
But
some of them here.
I'm going to stop you there. Wouldn't you do it together? Wouldn't you go, what are some of the common queries? You and I would sit down and go, okay, and what is it you want to be able to pull out of this easily?
You're absolutely right. I mean, it's possible that you could start asking a lot of questions and then the analyst goes, ooh, this question comes up a lot. I'm just going to make it a standard. So like you
Yeah.
could do that feedback thing asynchronously too.
Yeah.
We had a question here for whether feedback is constrained to a particular space or the whole system. The particular feedback is constrained to the space, but Databricks learns from the whole system. So if you would ask a similar question in another space, right, with similar tables, it would know based on the feedback that you've provided elsewhere that, maybe we should start answering some of the questions in this new space in the same way.
Another question, given the potential for misleading results to arise
Yes.
from subtle ambiguities,
Yep.
is it possible for a dictionary of such potentially risky words to be pre-prepared?
You're absolutely right. Yeah. So you can provide general instructions to the whole space, which defines the way that the space is interpreting any language used. So the examples here are things like three-letter acronyms, dreaded TLAs, making sure that those are defined for how these things are interpreted. If you're using abbreviations of any kind, all of that can get embedded as general examples or general instructions for the whole space. So yeah, defining a dictionary of risky words, definitely doable. In an ideal world, you might even start embedding that in your data sets, right? Because if it's ambiguous for everyone,
Yeah. Yeah.
where does it go?
Well, and that's what I was going to ask you. This all looks great, and you've made a and we can keep demoing. You've made a really nice demo environment, but presumably there's quite a bit of work in that back end to set up. Like we said before, the definitions of the phrases, the reports you're going to make easy for me to get, because you don't want me mishandling data as well, or grabbing data that I think means one thing, but in fact, for various reasons, means something very different. So is that kind of where Ignite steps in? You come in and get that back kind of skeleton set up?
Yes. I mean, that's where we're valuable, because we can go and talk to your technical SMEs and talk to your business users and figure out how those ideas connect. But in terms of once you've got the framework, in terms of setting it up, it's actually quite easy. You can add as many tables or as few tables as possible as you want. It's always best to start small and grow the context as more people need more things. But you end up with a screen that looks like this. Give the space a title, give it a description. How do you want to access it? And then just start adding tables to the space and see what you get. So at a base level,
that's you doing that, or would that be an analyst doing that, or is that something I can?
That would usually be an analyst doing that. I think that there's a certain amount of familiarity with where the data is that you need to have as a baseline to set up the space. But in terms of how much effort it requires, if you've done all the work to get your data in, to make it describe it well and to make it usable in that way, then there's not a lot that you need to do to just sort of create this little playpen and hand it over to your business users.
Yeah, I can't wait. I've got a couple of other questions. Would it be adaptable enough to evolve outcomes in batch versus streaming use cases?
Yeah, so batch versus streaming it's quite kind of the perennial problem with data, in the sense that if data is constantly flowing to your tables, then you're wanting things to be more and more up to date, right? If you run a query in this space on a streaming table, it'll give you the most up-to-date version of the data, but it won't be reusable in the way that a dashboard might. So you won't be able to get that, oh, our volumes or our sales are decreasing, like they're not where they need to be for this time of the day, right?
Yeah.
You would want to probably use an actual reliable, reusable dashboard. When we're talking about something like this is for your initial interrogation, I don't know what I'm really wanting, but I want to start seeing some information, or
Yeah.
I want to see a quick graph and I don't need to, I don't want to have to go through an analyst to get that information out.
Yeah, I get it. So this is less of that live dashboard concept and more of a reporting, interrogation, data analysis piece,
Yeah.
which is important because I know before you showed me with the tables, I can export them to Excel and add them when you do a request for me. And so then I can use that. If I've got my own data, like
Yes.
I'm in marketing, I might have my own data that I've sourced from some of my marketing platforms, and then I may need some sales or some dispatch prices or some data to cross match. So I can bring that out into Excel and put it into my own report and do my own analysis, which you're showing us now. While you're doing that, I've got the questions are coming thick and fast, which is awesome. Can Genie create more complex queries, for example, containing funky table joins or subqueries?
It can. It is one of those things where you would need to build the context slowly. So that's one of those, exactly like what we just showed, right? I asked in my initial run through whether or not the Genie space would be able to determine the total cost of energy dispatched over a region over time.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, it just gave me the dispatch price because it didn't quite understand that cost needed to be multiplied by volume.
Yeah.
Then after, running some of these queries elsewhere in the system, it learned that actually when you ask for total cost, you're wanting that multiplication. It learned what the join was and it ran the join to give me a completely different graph, which is actually more usable. So it can learn depending on, what other things people are doing in Databricks and what queries are being run and saved and leveraged by analysts and business users alike. But it wouldn't necessarily start there because that's where you start running into the risk of you don't know what you're looking at. So there's this process of training it to respond to your business as well as your data.
Okay, we've got a couple of other questions.
Yeah.
How well does the data need to be annotated to make this useful for an end user like Emily? I'm a what do they call it? A persona now.
Yeah.
Like data descriptions, etc.
Look, fair question. I think it's you need to describe it in a way that your business is likely to query it. So it's where someone like me would work with someone like Em to figure out, what's the best way to describe this. And sometimes that's obvious, sometimes it's not. So describing it well, what's your definition of well? For me, it's how my business users want to query the data. So you can take a stab at it as an analyst without talking to them, but you're not likely to get a good result. So that feedback, immensely valuable.
Well, and also I'm thinking that space that you showed me before where you can see where I've thumbed up and thumbed down things.
Yes.
You can, periodically look in there and go, wow, Emily keeps trying to run, she's running these reports that all look similar. I wonder what she's up to. I might reach out to her and say, hey, can I help? So I feel like that kind of enables you as an analyst to give, while I'm still free to self-serve, it also gives you this opportunity to provide service and reach out to the business user and say, hey, just wanted to, what are you up to here? What can we do? Can we build something? Or I notice you're running this every week or whatever the case may be. So it feels like it brings you as an analyst more into the business as well and understand what it is we're trying to do, which has got to be powerful for the analysts as well.
Exactly. Yeah. This is what democratizing data is, right? It's it's bringing it's bringing your data and turning it into information and then using that information to define decisions. And if everyone in your business is speaking the same language, you've now got a force multiplier on that you wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah. Okay. So, Mitch, we've got 2 more minutes because you and I talked about not wasting people's time on this, and we're more than happy to hop on and show people more things. And
Yep.
30 minutes is a really good chunk over time. So, last question.
Yeah,
How
no
does
worries.
AI BI Genie address governance, AI governance and compliance requirements, particularly concerning the transmission of metadata to OpenAI? Are there configurable guardrails to ensure data security and adherence to organizational policies? That was definitely not an Emily question. We've got an analyst on here.
Yeah. So Databricks by default has opted out of the collection of any of that information, right? There are guardrails that you can put in place that are more strict, but those are things around your data governance in general, right?
So you're saying it doesn't transmit to OpenAI? Databricks doesn't?
Yeah, it doesn't transmit any of the queries, or it doesn't store any of the prompts or completions. It sends the queries, gets a response in what that means, and turns it into to look at your data. But it doesn't store any of the queries. It doesn't store any of the prompt results. So that is not going to appear in, their logs. It's not going to continue to be used in their training, because really it's only useful for your business, right? Business jargon, there's some things that are general, but some things that are very specific.
Yeah, I get that. Hey, Mitch, one other question, and I can imagine your bosses are sitting on this call and they'll cringe when I ask you this one, so you might defer. How much does this cost? Presumably there's significant processing required here.
Look, great question. It's not, in my opinion, it's not significant. So your existing query engines, right? So in something like Databricks, you've got SQL warehouses that any business user, analyst, or dashboard would be using to pull data out of your system. You can just use an existing one. And you kind of saw before how quickly it generates a query and runs, right? It doesn't take a lot of time. So your only constraint becomes, how much data have you got, right? And you can start narrowing some of those things down. You can say, I only want to see the last 7 days, which will reduce the amount of execution time. Yeah. So it's not a significant change to your cost model, except that you might find you've got more users accessing your data, which in my opinion is a great thing, right?
Well, it's taking value out of the system. And I think speaking for someone who's always sat on the business user side of the equation, and someone who often signs off on budget, if I know something and I'm familiar with it and it gives me value and my team value, I'm significantly more likely to back business cases that that are requesting more funding for building out the data. And I think, to your point around democratization of data, it takes data into the realm of data being everybody's business and data being enhancing and building really real data-led organizations where it's not just the realm of the coders or the really smart analysts. It's something we all use and don't need to be afraid of and can feel empowered with. I feel like I just ended our call then.